He was never supposed to be king. God never wanted Israel to have any kings at all. Kings were the people's anxious demand. Give us a king so we can be like the other nations. So Saul was chosen, tall, handsome, the one who looked the part. But Saul's reign soured. God sent Samuel to Bethlehem, to the house of Jesse, to find another. One by one, Jesse brought forward his sons, the oldest, the tallest, the most impressive. And one by one, Samuel shook his head. Finally, Samuel asked, "Are these all your sons?" And Jesse replied almost dismissively, "Hine od hakatan v'hine ro'eh batzon." There's one more, the youngest, but he's out with the sheep. That's who David was. Just a kid dismissed by his own father. The one left outside while the others were paraded in. The nobody who nobody expected, who would one day stand before Goliath and change Israel's story. The soldier who led Israel's armies, the hero they sang about in the streets, singing, "Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." But heroes fall out of favor. From that day forward, Saul's jealousy grew into paranoia, and his paranoia into rage. The king turned on his own general, and David, once celebrated, was now a fugitive. Again, the one out with the sheep, this time not as a shepherd, but as an exile. It's at this very moment that we get Psalm 56. We know that from the superscription that opens when the Philistines seized him in Gath. So this is a captivity psalm. And Gath is not a random town. It's actually Goliath's hometown. The boy who once stood over the giant now trembles in the hands of the giant's people. The Bible gives us many moments when David is hunted, but this is the only time that it tells us that he's actually captured. That's the setting of this psalm when David cries out, "Chaneni Elohim, be gracious to me, O God, for people trample me. All day long my enemies oppress me. They band together, they lurk, they watch my every step as they hope to take my life." And then he says something striking. "Nodi safarta, you've kept track of my wanderings. Sima dimatani benodecha, halo besifrotecha. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not written in your book?" This isn't lofty poetry. It's the sob of a man undone. Captured, exposed, begging that even his tears not be forgotten. Sima dimatani benodecha, put my tears in your bottle. Bottle is how we translate it, but in Hebrew the word is nod. It's not fragile glass nor a fancy decanter. A nod was a traveler's water skin, a leather jug slung over the shoulder, carried on long ancient journeys. It was a canteen for survival in the wilderness. That's what David imagines God carrying. Not water, not wine, tears. As if God bends down to collect every tear that falls, placing it carefully in a canteen, not one drop wasted. Sima dimatani bino decha. Put my tears in that tear bottle of yours. Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is soaked with tears of so many kinds, a whole taxonomy of tears. There are tears of infertility and longing, Hannah weeping bitterly in the temple, Rachel crying out, "Give me children or I die." There are tears of love when Jacob first meets Rachel at the well. The text says, he kissed her and lifted up his voice and wept. There are tears of family fracture and reconciliation. Esau and Jacob weeping on each other's shoulders. Joseph weeps more than anyone in Genesis, again and again, as estrangement becomes reunion. And then there are prophetic tears. Jeremiah lamenting, "Oh, that my head were waters, my eyes a fountain of tears." The book of Lamentations itself is soaked with weeping. And then there's the wilderness, where the Israelites shed a different kind of tears. After the scouts return from the land with a fearful report, the Torah tells us the people wept all night. Their fear was real. The tears were real. But here, the rabbis do something jarring in their interpretation of those words. In the Babylonian Talmud, they call this episode a bichia shel chinam, a crying for nothing. And in that same passage, we find a midrash where they imagine God speaking to those tears, saying, "You cried a crying for nothing. I'll show you a crying for generations." It lands like a slap. God is literally saying, "I'll give you something to cry about." It's as disturbing a midrash as I've encountered. But it opens the door to an unnerving question. Does God put every tear into the bottle? Or are some tears too corrosive, too paralyzing to be gathered up? What do we make of this bichia shel chinam, tears that corrode rather than heal? Can grief really lead to destruction? The Maharal of Prague, a 16th century sage and mystic, he thought so. He wrote, "Weeping can bring about the very thing over which one weeps." In other words, tears of despair don't just describe reality, they can create it or realize it. Crying can cement the doom. In this case, the people's weeping was self-fulfilling and self-afflicting a prophecy. It turns out this unsettling notion of bichia shel chinam, wasteful tears, actually has some modern research behind it. Adam Grant wrote in the New York Times last year about the numbness that so many of us feel in the face of suffering. It has a name, he said, empathic distress. What happens when empathy overwhelms us to a point of shutdown? Research by neuroscientist Tanya Singer on the difference between empathy and compassion shows that when we only empathize with suffering, the brain's pain circuits light up, leading to overload and paralysis. But when we cultivate compassion, an entirely different system comes online, one that generates resilience and the will to help. In other words, not all emotional tears are the same. Some sustain us and some corrode. Our sages intuited this uncomfortable truth that the quality of our response to suffering matters as much as the suffering itself. The question isn't whether we feel, it's what we do with what we feel. Maybe that's the door the rabbis meant to leave open, not to comfort, but to agitate us into thinking, what do we do with our tears? This is the question that I ask tonight. on Kol Nidre. Do we, as a generation in the wilderness of our own, let it drown us with bichia shel chinam, wasteful tears? Or do we, like David, find ourselves praying to a God, Sima dimotenu benodecha, put our tears in your bottle? If there's any day in our tradition that asks us or invites us to try to speak David's prayer, to try to sort our tears, then it's today, on Yom Kippur. The day we pack our sanctuaries wall to wall across the world with as much honesty as we can muster. What do we do with the tears that we carry into this room? We live in an age of so much rupture. Families fracture over politics. Communities splinter over who is righteous enough. Our public square becomes a contest of call-outs, cancellations, and litmus tests. Tears get weaponized as if grief were a zero-sum game. Taking stock of our tears has become a treacherous exercise. And here, I'll speak personally and genuinely. I am not above the fray on this one. I struggle just as much as anyone to keep track of all the tears. For example, every Friday night when I introduce our prayer for healing or shelter, I always try to acknowledge groups whose cries deserve to be heard. And whenever I do, in the oneg, someone says to me, "Thank you." Because something happens inside when one's pain is seen, when one's grief is recognized. But also, more than a few times, I will hear rebuke from someone who felt what I would say de-recognized, someone who's feeling the grief of names not shared or a group not named. I think everyone in this room probably experiences this de-recognition in some context. In the context of synagogues, it might sound like, how could you pray for Israelis without mentioning Palestinians? Or how could you pray for Palestinians without mentioning Israelis? And to be clear, I am as much the critic as I am the criticized with others and myself. Take this sermon, please. Take an earlier draft of this sermon before I wrote the words, "Take this sermon." When I first wrote what I said 5 minutes ago about the taxonomy of tears, I'd spent hours poring over the Hebrew Bible, trying to track all of the tears. It was not the most uplifting exercise. After hours of sob sorting, I wrote out what I recalled. I named Hannah and Rachel, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and Jeremiah. Only later did I realize I had skipped over the very first tears in the Torah. Who did I overlook? It wasn't Eve. It's not Noah. It's not Lot's wife, unless you count a pillar of salt. It's not even Sarah. We never see her tears. Who did I overlook? Hagar. We never see Sarah's tears, but we see Hagar's. Expelled by Abraham and Sarah into the wilderness with Ishmael, left to die, she lifts up her voice and weeps, and God hears. I forgot the first time that God hears the sound of tears. Those tears, by the way, are included in one of the Torah readings for Rosh Hashanah on the second day. The question isn't whether we've missed someone's tears. We have and we will. The question is, what do we do when we realize it? Can we make room in that tear bottle? I'd like to make room in that tear bottle right now. When I read of Hagar weeping for her child, I think of Palestinian mothers weeping for their children. And I think of how many of our own people will not or cannot see those tears. It's not that I don't care about other tears in this war. Of course I do. My love of Israel is core to my Jewish identity, and my sense of where I belong as a Jew will always have some connection to Israel and to Israelis, to the home of 46% of our people, and the home to other peoples, including the children of Hagar. What is our collective capacity to see their tears? This summer, Haaretz reported the results of a survey by a respected Israeli polling firm conducted by researchers from University of Maryland and Penn State. The numbers were devastating. 82% of Jewish Israelis said they supported expelling Gazans. Nearly half said that when the IDF conquers a city, it should act as the Israelites did at Jericho, killing every inhabitant. I cannot unsee those numbers. I know it's one of many polls, but it sears. And I understand the trauma that produces such hardness of heart. The horror of October 7th, the worst violence against Jews since the Holocaust. Trauma teaches us to armor ourselves. But understanding why hearts harden doesn't mean accepting when they do. And let me be thoroughly clear. I'm not bringing up this study to harden anyone's hearts to Israelis. My goodness, Israelis right now need our love and need our humanity. This hardening, it cuts in all directions, across all nationalities and political parties. We see it in the emerging truther movements that claim October 7th was exaggerated, fabricated, a false flag. Survivors, testimonies doubted, Jewish tears erased. We see it when people tear down signs that cry out, "Bring the hostages home." We see it in the glorification of Hamas as resistance, as if massacring civilians could ever be liberation. We see it when people put the word alleged before the reports of starvation in Gaza. That too is erasure, the refusal to see tears that are falling. Each form of erasure is its own violence. It tells the mourner, your tears are chinam, nothing. So is it too much for us here to pray to a God who stores every tear, to speak to a God who holds the tears of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, alongside the tears of the hostages in captivity, and the Israeli families enduring a nightmare without end? Can we, like David, fathom Nodecha, God's one tear bottle, and in it glimpse all the tears of our own country, the tears of our Jewish community facing a dreadful rise in anti-Semitism, The tears of queer and trans people who are targeted and abused by a government that's sanctioning bigotry proudly. The tears of families struggling to put food on the table or a roof overhead. The tears of our immigrant neighbors who are hiding from ICE raids. The tears of children in this nation, a nation that leads all wealthy countries in child poverty. These tears are too much to store in any one human heart. But it's not too much to demand that the one eternal God, Sima dimotenu benodecha, place all our tears together in one vessel, in one home. It can't be too much to long for a relationship with that living God, because that is what makes us, Am Yisrael, a people that's shaped more by the prayers of David than anyone else in our past. David was never supposed to be king. He was born to be human. David is actually the most human in our tradition. He shows us the whole range: courage, cowardice, love, betrayal, beauty, brutality, joy, anguish. And David's tears today dare us to be not only human, but more human. We are only human when we cry. We are more human when we place those tears in God's bottle. We are only human when we break. We are more human when we turn brokenness into repair. We are only human when we weep. We are more human when we make our tears matter. Because really, that's our truest distinction as humans. Other animals, they fight, they sing, they build, they even dream. But we are the only ones on earth who shed tears of emotion. We are the weeping species. Judaism teaches that our tears are not wasted water. They can be sown. The psalmist sings, Hazorim bedima berina yiktzoru. Those who sow with their tears, they will be the ones who can reap in song. Each tear is a seed, not erased, but planted, falling into soil, watering the ground, carrying the possibility of new life. Tears make us human. Sowing them, letting them take root and bear fruit, this is how we grow in the likeness of God. Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Eternal One, God of our ancestors, God of David. Chanenu Elohim, be gracious with us, Eternal One. Sima dimotenu benodecha, put our tears in your bottle. As you inscribe us in the book of life, may we sow them not in rivalry, but in love, watering seeds of compassion, deepening seeds of justice, and bringing forth from sorrow a harvest of hope. Amen.